The mountain man was at the warped wooden table in the back room of the dry goods when the woman walked in with a folded paper in her hand and a clean cream apron over a faded pale blue work dress, and set the paper down on the table in front of him without sitting. She did not sit. She did not let her hands fidget. She put one chap's sun-darkened finger on the folded paper and pushed it a hand's width toward him across the warped pine. "Read it," she said. Kane Brose did not lift his head from the cup of coffee in his weathered hands. He had been at the back room table since 8:15. The dry goods at the south end of the crossroads had a back room with a worn pine table and a worn pine bench for the men who came in for the freight wagons, and the dry goods keeper had told Kane Brose at 8:15 that a woman would come in at 9:30 with a paper for him, and Kane Brose had drunk 1 cup of coffee in the hour and a quarter and had not lifted his head from the second. He lifted it now. "Mrs. Salter," he said. "Ada Salter," she said. "Mrs. is the name on the boarding-house book my husband died at 3 months ago. I have not been Mrs. since the burial. I have been Ada Salter since the burial. Read it." Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. He looked at her. She was 29, lean and sun-darkened, dark hair pinned back simply with one strand loose at her temple, gray-eyed and level and entirely unafraid. A faded pale blue work dress with sleeves rolled past the elbow, a clean cream apron at her waist, chapped sun-darkened hands. She had walked into the back room of the dry goods the same way she had walked across the bleached pale tan dust of the main street, which was at a steady unhurried pace and without looking left or right. He picked up the folded paper. He read it. The paper was a marriage agreement written in a careful, plain woman's hand. The paper named a paper marriage at the chapel at the crossroads on the following Sunday at 11. A paper marriage of the kind that gave a widow the legal protection of a man's name without giving the man any expectation of the widow's house or kitchen or back room. The paper named the rate, which was nothing. The paper named the term, which was open. The paper named the condition, which was 1. The condition was that the man would, on the Wednesday afternoon of the week following the paper marriage, ride with her to the South Fork of the river at the Lower County, where her husband's brother kept the section that had been her husband's and which her husband's brother had been at since the burial and was not paying her widow's share of, and stand at the gate of that section while she went up the path to the porch step and named in plain-spoken terms what her widow's share was. The paper said the man would not enter the gate. The paper said the man would not raise his voice. The paper said the man would not raise his hand. The paper said the man would stand at the gate. The paper said the brother of the husband would see the man at the gate and would not need to be told a second time what the widow's share was. He read it twice. He folded it. He set it down on the worn pine of the table. "Mrs. Salter," he said. "Ada Salter. Ada Salter, you have come into the back room of the dry goods at 9:30 on a Tuesday morning with a paper that names a paper marriage at the chapel at the crossroads on Sunday at 11 and a ride to the South Fork on the Wednesday after, and you are looking at a man at the table you have been told a great deal about in the months since you came down from the Lower County. I have been told a great deal about you in the 11 weeks since I came down from the Lower County. What did they tell you?" She did not let her hands fidget. "They told me you had killed a man at a saloon at Bishop's End 9 years ago. They told me the man you killed was a man who had cheated at cards and had pulled a knife on you first, and the sheriff at Bishop's End had ruled it self-defense and you had not been at a saloon in 9 years since. They told me you had a section 11 miles into the hills at the Upper Fork that no one had been to since the killing because you preferred no one had been to it. They told me you came into the crossroads on a Tuesday once a month for freight and for coffee at the back room of the dry goods, and that you spoke to no one at the back room of the dry goods, and that the dry goods keeper considered it a kindness that you spoke to him at all. They told me 3 days ago at the boarding house of Mrs. Pell that you had eaten a marshal for breakfast. Cainbros did not let his face do anything. The corner of his mouth moved once. I did not eat the marshal, he said. I know. What did the marshal do? He came to my husband's section in the lower county 4 years ago for a freight bill the freight house at Bishop's End said my husband had not paid. And my husband had paid it, and the marshal had been told to come to the section anyway. And the marshal stayed for breakfast because my husband sat him down at the kitchen table at 6 and put a plate in front of him and asked him plain at the table what the freight house had told him about the bill, and the marshal said what he had been told, and my husband produced the receipt from the tin box on the shelf above the stove, and the marshal looked at the receipt. And the marshal apologized at the table, and the marshal rode back to Bishop's End that morning at 7:15 with a piece of cornbread in his coat pocket. The breakfast was the breakfast my husband ate the marshal for. The eating of the marshal at the kitchen table was a thing my husband talked about for the rest of his life. The freight house at Bishop's End never sent a marshal to the section again. I have come down from the lower county 11 weeks ago because the brother of my husband has been at the section since the burial and has not paid me my widow's share in the marshal at Bishop's End, who has now been the marshal at Bishop's End for 19 years and has not yet forgotten the breakfast of cornbread, has told me in plain-spoken terms at the marshal's office at Bishop's End in the 7th week after the burial that the law in the lower county would side with me on the widow's share if I came to it with a man's name. I have not yet had a man's name. I have come into the back room of the dry goods at 9:30 on a Tuesday morning to ask the man at the table for the use of his. She stopped. She looked at him. He looked at her. He did not lift the coffee cup. You have asked the man at the table. I have. Why, this man, Ada Salter. She did not let her hands fidget. Because the 4 men in the lower county who I would have asked first are 3 brothers of my husband who are at the section the brother of my husband is at, and who would not stand at the gate. And the deacon at the chapel at Bishop's End, who is a fair man but who is 72 and has the gout, and who would not survive the ride to the South Fork. Because the 3 men at the crossroads who would have stood at the gate are the husband of Mrs. Pell, who has been dead 19 years, and the husband of the postmistress, who is at the freight house at Bishop's End on the Wednesday in question, and the deacon of the chapel at the crossroads, who is a fair man and is at the chapel on Wednesday afternoons for the choir. Because the dry goods keeper, who is a fair man and is not at any choir, has told me in plain-spoken terms at his counter last Friday afternoon that the man at the back room of the dry goods on the Tuesday morning of next week was a man who had once killed a man at a saloon at Bishop's End 9 years ago in plain self-defense, and that the man had not had a thing to say to anyone since, and that the man had a section 11 miles into the hills at the Upper Fork, and that if I had a Wednesday afternoon problem of the kind I had described to the dry goods keeper on the Friday afternoon, the man at the back room of the dry goods on the Tuesday morning was a man who would stand at a gate the way the dry goods keeper figured the gate needed standing at. That is the answer to why this man, the dry goods keeper, who has been a fair man for 11 weeks, named you. Cainbros looked at the worn pine of the table. He picked the coffee cup up. He set it down. He looked at her. I have not been to a chapel in 9 years. I know. I have not stood at a gate in 9 years for any reason other than to step off it onto my own road, I know. I have not had a paper of any kind with my name on it in 9 years that was not a freight bill from the dry goods at the south end of the main street. I know that, too. She did not let her hands fidget. I am not asking you to have a chapel after Sunday. I am not asking you to have a gate after Wednesday. I am not asking you to have a paper after the widow's share has come back to my hand at my kitchen on the section in the lower county. I am asking you to have a chapel on Sunday at 11 for an hour, and a gate on Wednesday afternoon for the half hour the gate will need, and a paper for the length of time the brother of my husband needs to see your name on it and decide what to decide about it. I am asking you for an hour and a half and a piece of paper. The piece of paper has my name on it already. It needs your name on the other line. That is the asking. She set one chapped sun-darkened finger on the folded paper. She pushed it back across the warped pine of the table to him. Cainbrost looked at the paper. He looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved once again. He did not let her see. I will read it once more, he said. He picked the paper up. He read it. He folded it. He set it down. The chapel at the crossroads on Sunday at 11. The chapel at the crossroads on Sunday at 11. The South Fork on the Wednesday after at 3 in the afternoon. The South Fork on the Wednesday after at 3 in the afternoon. The gate. Not past the gate. The gate. Not past the gate. He did not lift the cup again. He took the small worn steel pen the dry goods keeper kept on the warped pine of the table beside a small clean tin inkwell for the freight bills, and he dipped it once, and he signed his name on the other line of the paper. He signed it Cainbrost, in a plain, unhurried hand that was not the hand of a man who had been told he could not write. He set the pen back. He pushed the paper across the table to her. I will be at the chapel on Sunday at 11. I will be at the gate at the South Fork on the Wednesday after at 3. I will not eat the brother of your husband for breakfast. He paused. Unless the brother of your husband pulls a knife at the kitchen table at 6. The corner of her mouth moved. It was the first thing he had said that was a thing that had ever moved the corner of her mouth, and she let him see it. I will keep the cornbread in my apron pocket, she said. Cainbrost did not laugh. He had not laughed at a thing in 9 years. He had not been close to laughing at a thing in 9 years. He looked at the corner of her mouth, and he looked at his coffee cup on the worn pine of the table, and he looked at the warped pine wall of the back room of the dry goods, and he did not laugh. And the corner of his own mouth moved once again in the smallest first held quiet warmth of a man who had been told what was not funny for 9 years, and was now being shown what was. Ada Salter took the paper. She folded it. She put it in the pocket of her cream apron beside the imaginary cornbread. I will see you on Sunday at 11, Mr. Brost, you will, Mrs. Salter, Ada Salter. Ada Salter. She turned at the warped pine doorway of the back room, and she said one last thing in a voice she did not raise. The dry goods keeper said you had killed a man for breakfast. She paused. I figured I would tell you what they were saying. The corner of Cainbrost's mouth moved. She walked back out across the bleached pale tan dust of the main street at the same steady, unhurried pace, in plain sight of the freight house and the smithy and the small, open window of the seamstress at the south end. The dry goods keeper at his counter did not say a word. Cainbrost finished his coffee at the back room table and rode back up to the section at the upper fork at 10:15, and he thought about cornbread in an apron pocket for the whole 11 miles into the hills. He was at the chapel at the crossroads on Sunday at 11. He wore a clean dark Sunday coat over a clean pressed white shirt, dark trousers, polished brown leather boots. His clean brown felt hat held off his head in his hand at his side. He had not put on a clean dark Sunday coat in 9 years. He had taken the coat down from the wall peg of the small back room of the section at the upper fork on Saturday afternoon, and had set it on the bed, and had looked at it for half an hour before he had decided to brush it. He had brushed it. He had brushed it again. He had not put it on until 9:15 on the Sunday morning. Ada Salter wore a clean, good, faded, pale blue Sunday dress with a clean cream collar at her throat, and her dark hair gathered up with a length of cream ribbon, and a small, fresh, pale cream chrysanthemum pinned at her shoulder, and she did not let her hands fidget at any point in the half hour of the paper service, and the deacon at the chapel at the crossroads, who was a fair man, and had been the deacon 19 years and had performed many paper services, did not let his face do anything either. Mrs. Pell, from the boarding house at the south end, stood up with her. The dry goods keeper stood up with him. The deacon performed the service in 22 minutes. He pronounced the paper marriage of Cain Brost, of the section at the upper fork, and Ada Salter, of the lower county, at 23 minutes past 11. Cain Brost shook the hand of the deacon at the chapel door. The deacon held his hand 1 beat longer than necessary. The deacon said one thing in a voice he did not raise. "Mr. Brost, Deacon Hale, the chapel has not had you in it in 9 years. I know it. The chapel will hold a chair for you on the next Sunday, if you would have it." Cain Brost did not let his face do anything for 1 breath. Then he did. "I will think on it, Deacon Hale." The deacon held his hand 1 beat longer. That is the most a man has said at this door in 9 years. He let his hand go. Ada Salter and Cain Brost walked down the chapel steps in plain sight of the south end of the main street. He did not take her elbow. She did not take his. They walked side by side at the same unhurried pace they had walked across the back room of the dry goods, and at the gate of the chapel yard Cain Brost helped her up onto the seat of her small, worn black buggy with the smallest formal grip on her chapped hand, and let it go the moment her boot was on the boards. He did not get into the buggy. He stood at the gate of the chapel yard with his hat in his hand, and watched her drive down the lane toward the south road in the lower county, and Mrs. Pell from the boarding house came up beside him at the gate and stood with him until the dust of the buggy at the bend of the lane had settled. Cain Brost. Mrs. Pell. That is a woman. I know it. You will be at the South Fork on Wednesday afternoon at 3. I will. You will not eat the brother of her husband for breakfast. I will not, unless he pulls a knife at the kitchen table at 6. The corner of Cain Brost's mouth moved. Mrs. Pell did not let her face do anything. "The lower county boarding house I have heard about," she said, "the one her husband's brother is staying at. The keeper at it is a woman named Mrs. Hone, who was at school with me in the township of Pelham 41 years ago. Mrs. Hone has written me 3 letters in the last 11 weeks. She has named in plain-spoken terms what the brother of Ada Salter's husband has been doing at the section. I will tell you what Mrs. Hone has written me on the Tuesday afternoon at my kitchen at 4:30, if you will come to the kitchen at 4:30 on the Tuesday afternoon, and have a cup of coffee with me before you ride to the South Fork on the Wednesday morning. I would have you go to the gate at the South Fork on the Wednesday afternoon at 3, knowing what is at the gate. The dry goods keeper, who is a fair man, named you Cain Brost. He did not name a man who walks to a gate not knowing what is at the gate." I'm inviting you to my kitchen at 4:30 on the Tuesday afternoon to know." Kane Brost looked at her. "I will be at your kitchen at 4:30 on the Tuesday afternoon, Mrs. Pell. That is the way." He came at 4:30 on the Tuesday afternoon. Mrs. Pell told him what Mrs. Hone had written. The brother of Ada Salter's husband, whose name was Hewlett Salter, was 38 and had been at the section since the burial, and was running the section in the way a brother of a husband runs a section he intends to keep, which was to sell off the steers at the south yards a few at a time and to pay the freight house in his own name and not in the name of the late husband, and to refuse at the lower county chapel to acknowledge that there was a widow of his brother who had a widow's share that was not being paid. He had also, according to Mrs. Hone, who had heard it at the dry goods at the lower county on the Friday afternoon before, told a small group of men at the dry goods that the widow had taken a husband at the crossroads in the upper county on a Sunday at 11, who was a man who had killed a man at a saloon at Bishop's End 9 years ago, and that the husband was a paper husband, and that the paper marriage was not a marriage the law of the lower county would side with, and that the brother intended to be at the porch of the section on the Wednesday afternoon at 3, with a paper of his own that named the section as the brother's and not as the widow's, and that he would not let the widow up the path to the porch step. Kane Brost listened. He set down the cup of coffee. "Mrs. Pell, yes, the brother has prepared his speech. He has. He has prepared it for a paper husband he has not met. He has." "That suits," said Kane Brost. He rode to the South Fork on the Wednesday morning at 5. He met Ada Salter at the boarding house at Bishop's End at noon. They ate noon dinner in the kitchen of Mrs. Hone at the lower county boarding house. Mrs. Hone watched them at the kitchen table with the lined, kindly held quiet of a woman who had been the keeper of a boarding house for 41 years, and had not yet seen a paper husband eat a noon dinner with his paper wife in her own kitchen. And at 2:15 she stood at her own threshold and watched them ride out to the South Fork in plain sight of the road. The brother of the husband was at the porch of the section. He was a lean, tall man of 38, in a clean coat that had been brushed for the occasion. A new hat held off his head in his hand at his side, the small, polished, hopeful face of a man with a prepared speech. He had 3 men at the corral with him. The 3 men at the corral had hats on. The 3 men at the corral were brothers of his. Kane Brost rode up to the gate. Ada Salter rode up to the gate beside him. She climbed down on her own. She did not take the path yet. She looked at Kane Brost. He looked at her. "You will name the widow's share in the plain-spoken terms. I will. I will be at the gate. You will be at the gate. I will not eat the brother for breakfast. You will not eat the brother for breakfast." The corner of her mouth moved. She walked up the path. The brother of the husband took 2 steps down the porch step toward her. "Sister." "I am not your sister, Hewlett Salter. I am the widow of your brother. The widow's share of your brother's section in the lower county is 1/3 of the yearly increase of the herd and 1/3 of the yearly yield of the south field, and the small section house at the east edge of the section where I lived with your brother for 6 years, and which has been empty since the burial. The widow's share has not been paid for the 11 weeks I have been at the crossroads in the upper county. I have come to the gate today with my husband, Kane Brost of the Upper Fork, who is at the gate now, and who will stand at the gate until I am back at the buggy. I have come to name the widow's share in plain-spoken terms. I am naming it now." Hewlett Salter looked at the gate. He looked at Kane Brost. Kane Brost did not let his face do anything. He was 36, broad in the shoulder, lean across the chest, weather-toughened, a steady gray eye, sun-darkened jaw, 2 days of dark stubble at the jaw, his clean, dark Sunday coat over a clean-pressed white shirt, his clean brown felt hat held off his head in his right hand at his side, his other hand resting easy at his side. He did not have a rifle on his back. He did not have a hand on his belt. He had a hat in his hand and a steady gray eye on the brother of the husband. The brother of the husband looked at the 3 brothers at the corral. The 3 brothers at the corral did not look back at him. Sister, Mrs. Salter, Widow Salter, the section is mine. The section is your brother's. The widow of your brother is at the porch step. The widow's share is 1/3 of the yearly increase of the herd and 1/3 of the yearly yield of the south field, and the section house at the east edge of the section. I have come for the section house today. I will come for the 1/3 of the yearly increase of the herd and the 1/3 of the yearly yield of the south field at the end of the harvest in the 2nd week of November. The marshal at Bishop's End, who has been the marshal for 19 years, has signed the paper that says the widow's share is mine. The paper is in the pocket of my apron. I will not unfold it at this porch unless you ask me to unfold it at this porch. She set both her chap sun-darkened hands flat on the porch rail. She did not let her hands fidget. The brother of the husband looked at the gate. The man at the gate did not move. The brother of the husband looked at his 3 brothers at the corral. The 3 brothers at the corral did not move either. The brother of the husband looked at Ada Salter. Sister, the section house. The brother of the husband took his prepared speech back into his coat pocket. He did not unfold the paper that was already folded in the breast pocket of his coat. He looked at Cainbrost at the gate one more time. He looked at the dust at his boot. He looked at the porch. The section house is yours, he said. Ada Salter did not let her face do anything. The 1/3 of the yearly increase of the herd, the 1/3 of the yearly yield of the south field, the 2nd week of November. He did not answer. He nodded. Ada Salter took her hands off the porch rail. She walked back down the path. She did not look at Cainbrost as she passed the gate. She climbed back up onto the buggy seat. She turned the buggy. She drove back down the road at the same unhurried, steady pace she had ridden in on, and Cainbrost rode his bay mare beside the buggy at the same pace, and the brother of the husband stood at the porch step until the dust at the bend of the lane had settled. Mrs. Hone of the Lower County boarding house had warm coffee on the kitchen stove at the boarding house at 4:30. She set 2 cups on the kitchen table. She watched Cainbrost set his hat on a peg by the back kitchen door and sit down in the chair at the far end of the table on the right, which was the chair her dead husband had sat in for 37 years, in the way of a man sitting down in a chair he had not been told he could sit in, and Mrs. Hone did not let her face do anything either. "The section house is hers," said Cainbrost. "It is," said Ada Salter. Mrs. Hone poured the coffee. She set the small black tin coffee pot on the warm worn pine of the kitchen table. She looked at Ada Salter. Ada Salter. "Yes, Mrs. Hone, the chair Mr. Brost is sitting in was my husband's chair for 37 years. No man has sat in it for 19 years. I have not invited a man to sit in it. I am not going to invite Mr. Brost to sit in it again. The chair is the chair. Mr. Brost is sitting in it." Cainbrost did not move. He did not stand up. He did not let his face do anything. The corner of his mouth moved once. "That suits," he said. Ada Salter looked at the corner of his mouth. The corner of her mouth moved. "That suits," she said. She moved into the section house at the east edge of the section the following Monday. The brother of the husband paid the 1/3 of the yearly increase of the herd and the third of the yearly yield of the South Field in the second week of November. He did not come up the lane to the section house. He did not look at the section house from the porch of the main house at the section. The marshal at Bishop's End signed the new paper at the marshal's office at Bishop's End on the Friday morning after the second week of November in plain spoken terms, with a small wedge of cornbread on his desk that Ada Salter had brought him in a small clean cream linen cloth in the pocket of her apron. Cainbrost came down to the section house in the lower county at the end of the second week of November. He came on the Friday afternoon at 2:15. He came on his bay mare. He had a clean canvas roll behind the saddle. He stopped at the gate of the section house at the east edge of the section. He took his clean brown felt hat off his head. He did not enter the gate. Ada Salter came out to the porch step. She did not let her hands fidget. Mr. Brost, Cainbrost, Cainbrost. She looked at the gate. She looked at the gate again. The corner of her mouth moved. I have not been at this gate before, she said. I know it. The gate at the South Fork I was at 3 weeks ago was the gate of the section my husband had owned and which his brother had been at since the burial. The gate I am at now is the gate of the section house at the east edge of the section my husband had owned and which his brother is now no longer at. The gate I am at now is mine. It is. The man at the gate is not the brother of my husband. He is not. The man at the gate is my paper husband. He is. She set both her chapped sun-darkened hands flat on the top rail of the gate. She did not let her hands fidget. Cainbrost. Yes, the paper marriage at the chapel at the crossroads on Sunday at 11 was a paper for a Sunday at 11 and an hour and a half and a ride to the South Fork on the Wednesday after. It was. The Wednesday after is 3 weeks ago. It is. The paper has done what the paper was for. It has. She looked at him. The chair at the kitchen table of Mrs. Hone of the Lower County boarding house at 4:30 3 weeks ago, she said. He looked at her. That chair, he said, that chair, I sat in it. You did. The chair was the chair of the dead husband of Mrs. Hone for 37 years, and no man has sat in it for 19 years. I know it. I sat in it because Mrs. Hone said the chair was the chair and that I was sitting in it. I know it. The corner of her mouth moved. She looked at the warm, worn pine of the porch step beneath her boot. Cainbrost. Yes, the chair at my kitchen table at the section house at the east edge of the section is at the far end of the table on the right. It is the chair I have not invited a man to sit in for the 11 weeks before the 8 days since I moved into the section house. It is the chair I am not going to invite a man to sit in past the asking I am about to do. I am asking you whether you would come up the path past this gate at 4:15 on this Friday afternoon and sit at the chair at the far end of the table on the right and have a cup of coffee with me at the warm, worn pine kitchen table of my own kitchen. I am not asking past a cup of coffee on this Friday afternoon. I will ask you something else after the cup of coffee. You will say yes or no to what I ask you after the cup of coffee, in plain-spoken terms, at the warm, worn pine kitchen table. I am asking you the cup of coffee. That is the asking. Cainbrost did not put the hat on. He looked at the gate. He came up the path. She watched him come. He stopped at the porch step. He stepped up onto the porch step. He went into the small kitchen. He hung the clean brown felt hat on the wall peg by the back kitchen door. He sat down in the chair at the far end of the table on the right. She poured the coffee. She sat down in the chair at the near end on the right. He looked at her across the warm, worn pine of the table. The corner of his mouth moved. She looked at him. The corner of her mouth moved. She asked him the next question at the warm worn pine of the kitchen table on a Friday afternoon in the second week of November in plain spoken terms. She asked him plain. He answered plain. They were married at the small white-painted clapboard chapel at the crossroads at the upper county on a clear, cool Sunday afternoon in the third week of December, with the cottonwoods at the lane bare and the warm pale gold of the late-season afternoon light on the chapel steps. Mrs. Pell stood up with her. The dry goods keeper, who was a fair man, stood up with them. The deacon, who had given a paper service to the two of them 8 weeks earlier, performed the second service in plain spoken terms. He held Cainbrost's hand one beat, longer than necessary, at the chapel door at the end, and the corner of his mouth moved once again, and he said one thing in a voice he did not raise. "Mr. Brost Deacon Hale, the chapel will hold the chair. I will think on it, Deacon Hale." The corner of Cainbrost's mouth moved. The chapel held the chair. Cainbrost moved his clean brown felt hat from the wall peg by the back kitchen door of the section house at the east edge of the section in the lower county to the wall peg beside the cream apron, a hand's width to the right of the back door, the way that pattern moved in that country, without anyone naming it. The chair at the far end of the table on the right stayed his chair. The chair at the near end on the right stayed hers. The section house at the east edge of the section stayed Ada Salter's section house, and the section at the upper fork 11 miles into the hills at the upper county stayed Cainbrost's section, and the two of them moved between the two sections in the warm seasons of the years that followed, in the warm pale gold of late afternoons and the bleached pale tan of dusty roads and the warm, worn pine, of two kitchen tables that had 2 cups on them and 2 chairs at the near end on the right and the far end on the right, and the corner of his mouth moved at things she said for the rest of his life, in the way of a man who had been told what was not funny for 9 years, and had now been shown what was, and the corner of her mouth moved at things he said too. This was the story of Ada Salter and Cainbrost, the widow at the back room of the dry goods with the folded paper, and the mountain man at the warped pine table with the coffee that had been told for 9 years what was not funny, and had now been shown what was. Tell me in the comments if you enjoyed this one. We are always glad you came to listen.